Have you ever walked through a big box store and just stared at the piles of wood? You see all those 2x4s and pine boards, and you think, can I build something nice with this stuff? I mean, something you'd actually want in your house, not just a rough workbench for the garage. That's the question I wanted to answer. Can a regular person with regular tools take wood straight off the shelf and turn it into a decent piece of furniture? No fancy joiners, no expensive planers, just you, the wood, and a little bit of woodworking grit. This is the story of my little experiment. The challenge was simple. I wanted to build a small, rustic-style coffee table, the kind of thing you might see in a magazine, but with a more down-to-earth feel. But here was the catch. I would use only lumber bought from the local home center. No special milling, no letting it sit in my shop for weeks to acclimate. I would grab it, take it home, and start building. This is woodworking on hard mode. It's a gamble, because you never really know what you're getting. You might find a hidden gem, or you might end up with a pile of twisted, unusable sticks. So, I went to the store. I spent a good hour digging through the stacks. I looked for the straightest boards I could find. But, let's be real, it's slim pickings. Most of the wood had some kind of issue. There were big, ugly knots that looked like they could fall out at any moment. Some boards were bowed like a banana. Others had a twist that would make a pretzel jealous. This is the reality of store-bought lumber. It's grown fast, dried fast, and shipped fast. It's not meant for fine furniture. It's meant for framing houses. But I was determined to make it work. The goal was to see if the convenience of store-bought wood was worth the trouble. Could I save time and money by skipping all the prep work that fancy woodworkers do? Or would I spend more time fighting the wood than actually building with it? The excitement was real. It felt like a true test of skill. It's easy to build with perfectly flat, square lumber. But building with wood that has a mind of its own? That's where the real learning happens. I loaded up my cart with the best of the worst, paid the cashier, and headed back to my shop, ready for whatever this wood wanted to throw at me. Back in the shop, I laid out my lumber and took a good, hard look. The situation was not great. One of the main boards for the tabletop had a significant crown, meaning it humped up in the middle. Another had a wicked twist from one end to the other. Laying it on my flat workbench, it rocked back and forth like a seesaw. These weren't small imperfections. These were major defects that would make joinery a nightmare. My plan for a simple, clean coffee table was already starting to feel like a distant dream. I felt a little bit of that buyer's remorse creep in. Was this whole idea a disaster from the start? The first task was cutting the legs to length. Simple, right? Not so fast. Since the 4x4 post I bought for the legs had a slight twist, cutting it perfectly square was a challenge. I had to use my miter saw, but I couldn't just trust the fence. I had to clamp the piece down extra tight and make the cut slowly, hoping it wouldn't shift. Then, I had to measure and mark each leg individually, instead of using a stop block, because the twist meant each starting point was slightly different. It was frustrating. A task that should have taken 5 minutes took closer to 30. That feeling of fighting the material began immediately. For the tabletop, I planned to join several boards together. This is where things got really tricky. With perfectly milled wood, you just add glue and clamps. But my boards were bowed and crowned. When I laid them next to each other, there were huge gaps. You could slide a pencil through them. Pushing them together by hand was impossible. My basic set of tools suddenly felt inadequate. I don't own a jointer, which is the proper tool for this job, so I had to get creative. My trusty circular saw and a straight-edge guide became my best friends. I carefully trimmed the edge of each board, trying to create a flatter, straighter line. Even with my best efforts, the results were far from perfect. The edges were straighter, but not perfect. It was a slow, dusty process that created a lot of mess. I felt a wave of doubt. Was I just wasting my time? Maybe there's a reason people spend thousands on milling machines. Every step felt like a compromise. I wasn't achieving perfection. I was just trying to get to good enough. This project was quickly becoming less about building a coffee table and more about a battle of wills between me and a pile of stubborn pine. The wood was winning the early rounds. As I moved on to assembling the base, the problems kept piling up. I was trying to join the legs to the aprons using pocket holes, a simple and strong method. But because nothing was truly flat or square, the joints wouldn't pull together cleanly. When I drove the screws in, one side of the joint would be flush, but the other would have a noticeable lip. It looked sloppy. I had to use a lot more clamps than usual, trying to force the pieces into alignment before driving the screws. It felt like I was wrestling an octopus. Every time I fixed one problem, another would pop up somewhere else. My frustration grew. I had to step back and rethink my approach. Perfection was off the table. My new goal was rustic. That's the word we use when things aren't perfect, right? I started embracing the gaps. Instead of trying to hide them, I decided to make them a feature. For the tabletop, I gave up on a seamless glue-up. Instead, I left a small, consistent 1/8 inch gap between each board. This turned a bug into a feature, giving it a more plank-like farmhouse look. It wasn't my original plan, but it was a compromise that would allow me to actually finish the project. This meant changing my tool strategy too. My hand plane, which I normally use for fine-tuning, saw a lot more action. I used it to knock down the high spots where boards met, smoothing out the worst of the misalignments. It was a workout. I also relied heavily on wood filler and sawdust mixed with glue. I wasn't just filling nail holes, I was filling in gaps at the joints to make them look a little less jarring. The project was becoming more of a sculpture than a piece of precision woodworking. You have to be willing to adapt, or you'll just end up with a pile of expensive firewood. The project was holding together, but just barely. It wasn't falling apart, but it definitely had character. I could see where the base wasn't perfectly square. The tabletop had a slight, almost imperceptible wobble that I fixed by sanding one of the leg bottoms just a tiny bit shorter. It was a constant stream of creative problem solving. Every single step required a workaround. It was exhausting, but also kind of satisfying. I was finding solutions and pushing forward, even when the wood was fighting me every step of the way. The table was taking shape, flaws and all. After a final coat of finish, the coffee table was done. Standing back, I had to admit, it didn't look half bad. From a distance, it looked like a solid rustic piece of furniture. The finish helped hide some of the imperfections, and the plank-style top I was forced to create actually looked intentional. But up close, the story was different. You could see the slight gaps in the joints. You could feel where the tabletop boards weren't perfectly flush. It wasn't a masterpiece of fine woodworking, it was a survivor, a testament to perseverance and a whole lot of wood filler. So, was it worth it? Let's break it down. In terms of cost, the wood was cheap. That was the big win. But the hidden costs were in time and extra materials. I spent at least double the time I would have on a project with properly milled lumber. All that extra measuring, clamping, sanding, and filling added up. I also used way more wood filler and sandpaper than I normally would. The effort was immense. It was mentally draining to constantly fight the material instead of working with it. The project felt less like a creative joy and more like a construction job. So here's my verdict. For a beginner, I would not recommend this. It's just too frustrating. When you're learning, you want to build confidence, and fighting with warped wood is a surefire way to get discouraged and quit. However, if you're an intermediate woodworker looking for a challenge, or if you're building something where a rustic, imperfect look is the goal, like outdoor furniture or a shop cabinet, then go for it. Just know what you're getting into. Go in with patience, a willingness to compromise, and the right mindset. Don't aim for perfection, aim for done. In the end, I'm glad I did it. It was a great reminder that woodworking isn't always about perfect dovetails and flawless finishes. Sometimes it's about problem solving and making the most of what you have. It forces you to be creative and resourceful. So, should you try it? Maybe. Go to the store, pick out a few boards, and see what you can make. It might not be perfect, but you will definitely learn something along the way. And that's what this is all about. Now get out there and make something. I'd love to see what you come up with.